Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be checking out the new Eachine Wizard TS215. Now, in the past, the Wizard series has been pretty popular. The very first one was extremely popular, I think, because of its price, although it was missing some features, like it didn't have an on-screen display, but back then Copters really didn't have an on-screen display, and now it's become the standard. So then we had the X220S, and I really like that. I actually bought two of those myself. I know a lot of reviewers thought that it needed a lot of work, and it did, but I didn't mind doing the work on it, and I still thought that it was a nice freestyle copter, if you're willing to put a little bit of work in. And now we have this one, and I was really excited when I saw this one at first, because as many of you might know who are subscribed to the channel, I am a huge fan of ultralights, specifically the Hyperlight floss, and I wouldn't say that I have a main rig, but I really like this frame and combination, and I've built two of them. One of them gets used to switching out components and trying different things, so I built one that I planned on keeping just for myself. And I was a little bit worried as well, because I was worried about people mentioning, oh, it's a clone of the floss, and I actually don't think it's a clone. I think it's a little bit unfair to call it a clone. I'd say it was definitely inspired, and it's a hot topic at the moment, cloning. I know Tommy from Rotor Riot, he made a video on his frame being cloned, specifically someone accessing the actual files to make a complete copy of it. And I know Final Glide Oz, I watched his live stream, and he's got some strong opinions on cloning as well, and I can understand that. With the floss, the original designer, Bob, or Kebab FPV, I'm a big fan of his channel and his designs as well. I've seen a couple of posts where he's reacted to this, and he seems to be okay with it, because this is actually the Floss V1, and there's a V2 now, and I think even Diatone have made an almost similar copy and said that it was inspired, and they've mentioned Bob. And yeah, he doesn't seem to be so bothered. I think he believes that Banggood isn't his demographic. However, I beg to differ, because I buy stuff from Banggood, but I buy into the Floss series and the Hyperlight stuff and the Pyrodrone stuff, so I do think that it trickles down, but I'm glad that he's not so offended by this, because it's not a complete clone. I mean, it's clearly inspired. It's a Stretch X, and so is this. And something that's really unique about the Floss is the top plate. Of course, we've got this spanner shape here, or G-string or thong, however you want to call it. However, it's not a complete copy of it. The shape is different. If we look at the shape of this one and then the shape of this one, it is different. It's just a similar style. And how many frames do you know that have a similar top plate? It's just that this top plate is so unique to get it really stripped down and lightweight, and they've decided to go with that. One downside of the top plate that they've decided to go with is they've put these little hooks, I guess you would say, at the back for the antenna. The problem with that is you can't put any of these mounts over the top of it. I think if they were going to copy it, it'd been nice if they would have made it so that we can use some of these, but I don't know, maybe someone will come out with some different 3D prints for it. If it's a popular model, we'll have to see, of course. And the reason that this is so thin is to make it a lightweight copter, and that's what I thought they were going for with this thing, but it's not really a lightweight copter, which I think if they'd have just gone for a different top plate, they could have got away with saying that it wasn't inspired whatsoever by the Floss, because this weighs, without a battery, 346 grams, and if you compare that to mine, this is 257 grams, so we're almost talking 100 grams heavier there. In fact, I could make this even lighter if I put a smaller antenna on it. Anyways, why is this one so much heavier when it seems similar? Well, first of all, the motors are heavier and bigger. They are Eachine branded, and they are a 2306 2450 kV. One thing I want to say about this Copter, by the way, straight away, is it's so pretty. I was really skeptical about this with quality and things, you know, Eachines, past, etc. It is absolutely beautiful to look at. You know, it's a work of art. Literally, it's been painted. This is all carbon here, and it's been painted. But that brings me on to the other reason why it's heavier, and that is the arms. You can see the thickness difference in the arms. I think the arm thickness this way is the same, so that's going to be 4mm, I think. But yeah, much thicker there. And I think what they wanted to do was make a floss style Copter. But you see, this is a completely stripped out racer, and it's designed for the arms to actually break. Well, a lot of people buying into this are probably going to be fairly new and beginners. So I think they were going for a thicker arm so that it doesn't break as easy. So I think that's why they've changed it. However, I will say, though, that I have abused these frames, and I've only actually broken one arm, and it was smashing into gates lots of times. And it didn't even break, actually. It delaminated, but that is why I've got loads of arms, which of course is a little bit of an overkill there, but there you go. If you're going into an original floss, which I recommend that you do, by the way, because it's not one of these frames that's ridiculously expensive. I think it's about $47, which I think is reasonable, absolutely reasonable. I'm not sure if it is in stock though, and I'm not sure if the plan is to discontinue this one because there's a V2 now. Like I say, I think that's probably one of the reasons why Bob isn't too bothered about this. But there are other similarities. For example, look at this bottom plate here. It's a very similar shape, and I think it's fair to say that, you know, this is what they were going for. We've got different shaped arms here as well, so yeah, I don't think clone is the right word. I think inspired, and I think inspired is okay. And, you know, with Eachine, they could have completely just copied it, I would say, and they didn't, so yeah, I think that's okay. We've also got the antenna mount here, and this is something that I actually didn't like on the original floss, which is why I've got this 3D printed mount here. But yeah, another sort of telltale sign that they were inspired by that is this is exactly the same where this mounts. And yeah, it's not too great because it can get knocked off, especially if it's a micro UFL. This is an MMCX Connect, which is a bit more hefty. But yeah, I'd have preferred it to be up here, because yeah, it can get knocked off down there. So you're given this silicon style battery mat. It doesn't feel very grippy, but I'm sure it's going to do the job. You're given these two Eachine straps as well, and you see these cutouts here, they're designed for two straps to go around them, just like on the floss. You have to fit this yourself. Be careful because it does have a direction. We've got a little tiny hole here and that lines up there, but all the other screws line up otherwise. Quite nice, so you can still access the screws, which we might be having to do a little bit later. So let's take a look at some more of the specs. The ESCs, they are Eachine branded, and they are individual ESCs. They are 40 amp and they are 32-bit, and they're set up to run D-Shot 1200, so much more modern than the other wizards that have been out there. Just one thing I noticed though, the gauge wire that they've used on this is so thin, but it should be okay for 40 amp, I guess. And then if we look at where that's going into, this is a power distribution board, and this is really unusual. So, you know, this is their own design, because I'm not aware of anything like this that fits the floss. This is a power distribution board, and it's also a F4 flight controller. And you can see we've got a buzzer in there as well. Now, I was a little bit skeptical about this because if we look at copters that did this, for example, the Shuriken X1, that one had problems of vibrations coming through to the flight controller, and you had to soft mount the motors. There's no soft mounts on this, however, you can't see it, but it's got one of those isolated IMUs, so it's an Omnibus F4 SD built into this shape here, so I imagine that's a one-off. Maybe the components and electronics are copied from a different board, but this shape is definitely unique, I would say, and probably not copied. Yep, so you can see we can put a micro SD card in there. The only issue that I've really got about this is, you know, the flex on it. So if I can't remember where it is yet, over this side, there's no standoff in the middle there. So if these do lift up, I imagine it could snap this. You'd have to replace your flight controller. I think it could have done with a little extra standoff in there, personally. And we've got a bootloader button there, and then we've also got a buzzer. It's built into the flight controller. You do need to remove the little sticker, otherwise it's not going to be very loud. And then moving up here, we have, this is the part that I don't like. However, I think there's something we can do about it. This is the built-in DVR. So they've tried to do sort of like a mini split thing, but I don't think they've quite achieved it, because it's more like the DVR that you see through your goggles, in that it records 720p. And you can change that. It's actually set to 640 480 VGA, and you've got a little rocker on the back there, so you need to provide your own micro SD card. Now, there's no instructions with this. That might not be the case for the final version. This is an early version that I've got here, but yeah, I used a Class 10 U1 32GB micro SD card. That worked. It's spring loaded and there's no protection on it, so if you have a crash, that can ping out. That field over there has about 4 micro SD cards out there, really nice ones as well, that pinged out of the old Xiaomi Yi camera and also the GoPro Hero 4. So yeah, maybe a bit of tape over that, but I can't see me using this, and hopefully we'll be able to bypass it, and we'll look at that. But yeah, you've got this little rocker on here. If you've got a card in there, then if you move it to the right, that will start your recording and stop the recording. If you long press it in, then you get a menu where you can change the format, etc. And also the video length. I think it only goes up to 5 minutes before it creates another file. And then, yeah, if you press backwards, I think that gets you out of the menu. And also a long press backwards actually lets you play back the DVR footage that it's recorded as well. So nice features. It's just that, yeah, I've had a quick look at it and I don't think it's great. First of all, if you don't have a card in, you get card error right in the middle of the screen, which isn't ideal. And the way that I would describe it is it feels like there's lag there, but I actually think it's just frame rate drop, just like the old Hubsons used to do. And the way I like to think of it is it can appear like it's lag, but actually it's a drop in frame rate. So if you're used to playing a computer game at 60 FPS and all of a sudden it starts staggering but it's still over 30 FPS, it can annoy you. Well, I think this is probably running maybe at 30 FPS, maybe even lower, you know, so it can appear like it's lagging, but it's actually just because it's dropping frames. You could argue that it's a similar sort of thing, of course. And then above that we've got the VTX. It is a 72 channel, so highly illegal on some of the channels, so be careful with that. It's also a switcher, but it's got smart audio and it's linked up on, I think it's the UART3, and that was set up, so that's actually quite nice. So you can go through the on-screen display, change the power output. I think it's got a pit mode as well, and it goes all the way up to 800 milliwatt and then down to 25 milliwatt, so that's pretty nice. The VTX seems like a nice one, and we've also got a indicator on there as well, which I really like. Just a button there, and a single press goes through the 8 channels, a 2-second press through the many different bands, and then I think it's a 3-second press will go through the 4 different power outputs on there. I really like this, and it looks like it's got a microphone on there as well. So if we move around to the camera, they are saying that it is a 1200 TV line CCD camera. I'll have to see if that is the case. I think this DVR is confusing me because, first of all, the DVR, it records in 4:3 format as well. So this could actually be a CCD camera, and it's just hooked up to this DVR and it's making it look awful. So yeah, I'm gonna try and fly it, I think, with this DVR, but I can see me switching it out and seeing what the camera's like then. The lens, it seems like a narrow on, maybe 2.8, but again, that could be the DVR skewing it. So I'll have to see what it's like. But in general, I tell you what, it's such a clean build for the money. What, £146? So you're talking the price of a Dart Max. If it takes a little bit of fiddling around to get this DVR out of the way, we might lose some weight as well. Of course, the problem with that is we're not going to have any other way to get any HD footage unless we can find a GoPro mount that fits on here. There probably is one on Thingiverse, to be fair. So let's talk about the antenna, because I think this is a bit of a shame. So the antenna is a clear rip-off of the TBS Triumph. It's RPSMA, it's a little stubby one. And yeah, I know that TBS are extremely sensitive to having their stuff copied. In fact, I don't think they list stuff on Banggood because of that, and this definitely isn't going to help them whatsoever. I mean, it's a clear copy, the quality's not as good, and it's actually not great for this copter. You see, with us having the connector down here, you can see that it doesn't lift up very high, and if we just screw it in, if you are flying that way from yourself and are at that angle, you're going to get absolutely horrific reception, because the signal's got to travel all the way through the copter and it's going to block it. So I wish they would have a little mount up the top there, and then we could have this nice and high up. And I don't think that would be difficult to do. But look at this, even the logo is similar to the TBS logo. So yeah, they are not going to be mending any bridges with TBS with this whatsoever. So if you take a look at this frame as well, it's actually got more room for the stack. If you look at the floss there, you can see that it's not as high, and I think you could easily put a split in here. I think they should have gone along that line, really. Maybe release one that doesn't have a DVR and then a more expensive one with a split. I don't know. But yeah, we've got this TPU mount here for the camera. And if they wanted to save a bit of weight, they could have put one of those little micro Swift copies in there. But they've gone for the full HS1177 size, so you know, it's another place you could save a little bit of weight if you're looking to modify this one, and I think this one is going to be one to modify. Another little gripe that I've got, you see the USB connector there, it gets in the way of the coax for the RPSMA connector, and you don't want to be putting strain on your USB connector, otherwise it could lift this up, and that wouldn't be good because you'd have to replace the entire thing. You know, these little USB connectors, well, I've not managed to successfully solder one back on, put it that way. So this is the Bind and Fly version. It's come with a FreeSky XM Plus, and you can see there that it is just cable tied underneath. Unfortunately, they have cable tied it where the bind button is pressing against this carbon plate, so I had to cut this away to get to the bind button, and because this has been put in so tight, so actually I didn't have to put these in, which I like. So we have got a cable tie and some heat shrink. However, because that's put in so tight, you can't twist around the receiver without putting strain on those little tiny UFL connectors, so I've had to put it back in that way. They've also used a servo cable in there as well, rather than soldering it direct, and if you were trying to save weight, of course you'd solder it direct, but not a big deal. I don't think that's what they were going for with this. So the props, absolutely love the props. They are Dell Cyclones, they are 5046, absolutely love the colours. And you can see there that these nuts that you're given, they are directional. By the way, I should mention the motors have a hollow shaft, and they also have a hex driver underneath there as well. Really like the looks of these motors, they seem really nice. But yeah, like the props, and you're given a spare set of those, but they are the clear kind. Let's take a look at some other stuff you get. So we got the feet there, we have got a battery mat, so if you want to sandwich a battery in there, and we've also got another silicone pad for that. It seems, but I tend to not use those. Get a load of cable ties, which is good because I had to use one of them for this. But yes, the ESCs actually are not cable tied down, so you might want to do that. There's no foam under there as well, actually, so I'll have to see if we get any vibration issues, but that seems really tight. Usually like to have a little bit of wiggle room in there if it throws an arm or something like that. Anyways, so we've got a couple of spanners in there, and we've got actually a load of spare screws, which I really like. I have no idea what this is about. It's a carbon fiber machine gun. Let me know in the comments what you think that's for. As I say, there's no instructions. What on earth could you use that for? Just do away with it. I mean, you know, are we really paying for a carbon fiber machine gun there that does nothing? I mean, why? That seems to be it. It comes in this box here. Again, it's got that logo on the top of it there. And yeah, you have to take the props off for it to fit in the box. So a little bit of a peeve of mine, but it is a 5-inch racer after all. So you are not given a battery with any of this, of course, so what battery should you use? Well, I'm going to be using these Tattoo R-Line 1300 mAh 4S batteries. Now, they say that it will take a 4 to 6S battery. However, the ESCs do take a 4 to 6S power, but according to the specifications online, the Omnibus F4 SD can only take up to a 5S. And with these ESCs not having any capacitors on or anything like that, today's test is just going to be on 4S because it is just so muddy out there, and I could possibly expect a desync on a 5S battery, and especially with these bigger motors as well, I think it's going to be more suited for a 4S personally. One thing that's interesting about this flight controller is it does have a current sensor, so all of that is working, and you have to do a complete setup in Betaflight pretty much. The only things that were set up were D-Shot 1200, but it had motor stop on. The ports are set up correctly, so the UART1 is for the receiver on the Serial RX, and UART3 has the peripheries set to smart audio. However, it came flash with version 3.2, so we're a little ahead of that now. So the best thing to do is to go into the CLI and type diff and copy all of that, because it's going to give you your main setup there, and then put that into a text document or something like that, and then we can go back in and reflash this. So Omnibus F4 SD as the target. So I've gone and done that and put the latest version on there, and then updated the CLI, and then of course there are some other things that you're going to have to change as well. So I will show you my setup for that. So here we are in the Betaflight configurator. You now have to download this from GitHub. So I've got the quadcopter plugged into the computer via a USB connector, which you have to source yourself. So I've got expert mode on here, and I'll just show you very quickly the ports. I didn't have to change anything. Here you can see we've got the smart audio down there on the UART3, and then we've got the Serial RX for the receiver. Go into the configuration here. So it was set up as D-Shot 1200, but motor stop was on, so I've turned that off. I've also set the digital idle to 6 to make sure we don't get any flips of death. It was set at 4.5 out the box. I just bumped that up a little bit. It was actually set to 8K 2K. I've changed that to 8K 4K. It also had barometer enabled. I do believe these Omnibus F4 SDs have a barometer, but it tends to not work very well in Betaflight, so I wouldn't bother with it. No board alignment there. You can see this was set up, so serial base receiver there, and then S-bus down here. I've turned dynamic filter on and anti-gravity, and also air mode permanently on as well. ESC sensor is off because it doesn't have that linked up. And LED strip was turned on. It doesn't have an LED strip, this one. I should have mentioned that, so I turned that off. Also turned the USB off there, and I've also put the craft name in there. It didn't have that either. If we go into power and battery, it's got onboard ADC for both voltage and current meter, and those seem to be okay. So I've set the minimum cell voltage to 3.2 because I don't like the beeper going off when I do full throttle and the battery sags. I've also lifted up the max cell voltage if I ever want to use a high volt. So failsafe, just check that it works, so remove the props and then turn your transmitter off once it's armed, and hopefully it should stop. PID tuning, these look just like stock PIDs to me, and usually find that the D's a little bit too high if you aren't running a GoPro, so I might have to play around with that. I've bumped the Super 8 up to 0.8, and I don't think I touched anything else. For the receiver, you can see I've switched it TAER1234 to match my Tyrannus. The XM Plus that this one's come with doesn't have the firmware on it to have the RSSI and an aux channel. It's also the international version if you are running EU LBT, but I tend to find anything that comes from Bangor receiver-wise is usually the FCC version. Into modes, and just angle was set up on the aux 1, so I've switched that around. We've got arming there on the aux 1, and then I've got angle mode. This is just for the Maiden. I like to have angle mode in there. And then we've got acro, and of course that'll be air over here as well because it's permanently on. And then I've got the beeper on aux 3. I don't use turtle mode because I don't like it, but of course you can do that with this because it's a BL Heli 32. So there's no need to do any adjustments with the motors. Everything was running the correct way. So actually no need to go into the BL Heli 32 configurator either. But if you do want to go in there and mess around, you'll have to get the standalone configurator for BL Heli 32. The on-screen display had absolutely everything turned on. So I've just turned these ones on here, so we got the voltage, and then we've got like current information here. Also the VTX channel I find quite useful. We can do that with smart audio, and you can go into the on-screen display menu and change all that around. I won't go into that because it is quite well known, but you can change your power output of your VTX and your channel through the on-screen display. Now I've got this up here because the DVR has come in a NTSC format, so you have to lift them slightly higher up, or you can choose NTSC there as well, but I just tend to put it on auto. But yeah, I've turned all of that stuff off, and then some of this stuff off here as well. And then that's pretty much it. I think we're going to the CLI and type in version, just so you can see I've updated it to 3.24. And just while I'm here, I always put in the command set small underscore angle equals 180, and then save. Just means that when I'm in angle mode, I can have it arm. I don't have to wait for it to level out before I can arm it. It's very handy for if you get stuck in a tree or something like that. It's not wanting to reconnect. There we go. Of course, you're going to need a transmitter. Now, I'm going to be using the FreeSky X10S, and you're going to need a way to FPV as well. So I'm going to be using my Fat Shark Dominator HD3s with a Menace Invader patch antenna, not this one, because it is a cloverleaf, so circularly polarized, not linear, so I need to switch that out. And I'm using a aomway cloverleaf antenna and the Furious FPV diversity module. Okay, let's go for the Maiden with this guy. These are just the stock PIDs, starting off in angle mode. It is -4, don't be fooled by the sun. I'm not actually hearing any initial vibrations or oscillations. Let's give it a punch and see what it's like there. Aha! Yeah. Definitely some D-term oscillations there. Too many, just as I suspected. But that's something that can be ironed out for sure. Okay. Let's try acro. Feels pretty floaty. That could be because of that 6% idle that I gave it. Yeah, it's definitely going to need some work on those PIDs. It feels alright so far. Probably just going to need the D coming down, what, 35 on the pitch? It's too much. But I think so far so good. Famous last words, eh? It's not too loud on these props either, although I'm just giving it small punches. I don't know why they just don't give these to pilots to tune them. I mean, obviously they're working to a budget. Maybe that is my job and I don't realise it. Yeah, I don't want to be flying that too long like this with the motors gurgling. It's a sign that the D's too high. But it's nice flying line of sight at least. I am worried about that DVR. I'm going to give it a try, but I have very low expectations of it with the DVR. It's got plenty of punch. Too much punch for me on the line of sight. Can't keep my eyes on it. Yeah, you can hear that there. Gonna lower the D probably to the low 20s, I would say, for the FPV flight. But the line of sight flight, at least it has passed. So this is what all the fuss has been about. This is the recorded onboard DVR footage, so not from the goggles. This is from the micro SD card from the Copter, and I really don't think it's been worth it whatsoever. So I selected the 1280 by 720p option in the menu, which is the HD setting. You've got VGA, which is a 640 by 480, then you've got D1 and then HD. So the other lower formats actually record in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which is correct because this is a 4:3 camera, and I do believe it's a CCD camera, and it is being masked by just this poor quality DVR. So it records at just 24 frames per second, so you know it's absolutely got no patch on any of the other DVR options, such as the split or even that DVR that was on the Eachine Lizard. It's just not worth it whatsoever. It does record in a high bit rate. It's like 24 megabit, but it's not worth it at all because these CCD cameras, they're not a HD camera, and yeah, it just looks like the DVR through the goggles, except there's no breakup, so that's no good. So let's take a look at the footage through the goggles, and I was wrong earlier because there's a frame rate drop, but there's also a considerable amount of lag, which means that I can only really do these very slow rolls because, you know, it's tricky to fly like this. I made sure the camera was quite far forward as well so that I wasn't going too fast in case I had any issues. You can see as well we've got the recording time there. It does cover the on-screen display. So if you do want to persevere with this, you're going to want to move your on-screen display around. The reception was very good, I have to say, and there was very little noise that came through to the picture. But man, this DVR is making this Copter an absolute dud. So I think it's time to take it to the bench and see if we can rescue this Copter from this horrible idea of having a onboard DVR. So you're going to need a 2mm hex driver to remove the top plate. The screws are nice and recessed, so I'm going to remove all three of those and then just move the top plate out of the way with the receiver still connected. Then I'm undoing the nylon nuts and disconnecting the wire harness from the VTX. Then I'm going to lift that up out of the way. Then we've got some more standoffs above the DVR, so I'm going to remove those and then lift this up. So we've got two connections on this DVR board. It's the camera in and out, so you need to disconnect both of those and then lift the camera up, and then you're going to need to disconnect it here. This is the camera input there. So you're going to need a flat blade, and we're going to take the wires out of the 1mm pitch 4-pin JST connector, and that is because the camera connector is a 3-pin. So I'm removing those there. Be very careful. And this is the 3-pin that we can use on the DVR side. That is the video that I've disconnected, and then I'm just sliding the direct camera video in there. The next one is a 5V. So I'm just doing them in order so we don't get lost of the order, but it does say on the flight controller the order actually, which is fine. So that's the 5V going in, and then this is the ground. Just make sure that you're very careful on the 3-pin. Unless you've got loads of spare 3-pins, then, you know, go ahead, break them all you like. So now we can put the camera in directly, bypassing that DVR and throwing it away because it's no good. While I was here, I thought I'd show you the floating IMU. It's on a little bit of gel there, and it seems to do its job. So now I'm actually putting those standoffs back in, minus the DVR, so we've got some space. And then those are the nuts going in. Yeah, so we don't get any noise. I separated it. That's the connector going back into the VTX. And then I messed up. I should have fed the receiver tab through. So you can do that because it's all just plug and play, just to make it a little bit neater. So do that before screwing everything back together. And then that's the top plate back on. Okay, so now that the pesky DVR has been removed, I've decided to fit a GoPro on here. So I've used the tiny bit of silicone that they provided for the sandwich plate, and that's sticky back, so I've just put that on there. Then I'm using a PRCJ GoPro 5 mount, and I've just used some of the spare cable ties, and that fits on there nicely. The only problem with using a GoPro and the antenna being down here, so I switched the antenna out for an aomway, but you can see there that it does get in the way of the GoPro. So when it's like that, for example, I might not have great reception, but we'll see what it's like anyways. And I'm going to be running this at 25 milliwatt. So let's go and take it for a fly and see how it performs. Well, what a transformation this has been. And Eachine, what on earth were you thinking, adding a little toy DVR to an absolute monster of a quadcopter? This is a fantastic piece of kit now. And there's no latency, there's no lag. I've got my GoPro on the top there so I can do my HD recording. They were so close to absolutely nailing this and failed on the smallest of things, and I hope people are able to see through it, because I think the Eachine brand is a good thing. It gets people into the hobby in a cheap way, and I do think it eventually trickles down to the more premium frames, because that's what happened to me. I started off with a ZMR. I didn't know that it was a copy or a clone. I imagine a lot of people buy into clones not knowing that they are clones, and I think that's why we get upset when, you know, some of these companies say don't buy clones. We didn't know they were clones and wouldn't do so if that was the case most of the time, I would say. And I absolutely love this copter now. It flies like a dream. What I actually had to do was bump the D back up pretty much to stock, because when you add a GoPro, then the stock values become more useful. So yeah, you're going to need 2 PID profiles. If you aren't using a GoPro, you're going to need to reduce the D by a lot, probably down to about 19 even, maybe lower than that, because when I did the flight using the DVR, I still felt some oscillations there, but not when I added the GoPro. Now, there is a little bit of noise filtering through to the DVR. It's nothing to cry about though. You know, it's much more difficult to eradicate noise on a 5-inch copter, and I think the video is pretty clean. And because we've got individual ESCs, we could potentially add capacitors on there and maybe even push it to 5S. And yeah, there's loads of modifications that can be done to it as well, so I think it's a good starting copter. Of course, I put the same disclaimer out there. If you are new to the hobby, don't go straight for a 5-inch. Go for something smaller like a brushed micro where you're not going to do any damage, and once you've mastered that, then go on to something like this. And yeah, if you are willing to do the small modification, which I think anyone could do, so, you know, it's a small thing. Of course, you know, you're probably thinking, well, why didn't they just not include it and make it cheaper? They should do that, absolutely. But I still think the price is good, despite that it's got that. And do away with that carbon fiber machine gun. I mean, what on earth was that about? Sometimes I wonder what's going on there at Eachine, but the core of this copter is very good. We've got so many features, you know, current sensors, we've got smart audio, you know, on-screen display, absolutely everything you could ask for, and I recommend it if you make this change. So I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get one, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.